Today, our modern notion of justice goes back to the Greek and Roman world. The image of justice that's portrayed in every local courthouse is that of Justitia, the Roman goddess of justice, or Dike, the Greek pendant. This is always presented as a blindfolded female figure holding a scale. What does this image really represent? We tend to interpret it with our modern intuitions and thus distort it completely and misunderstand the ancient idea behind it. Today, we think that the scales represent two sides in a legal proceeding, such as a court case. Thus, a judge or a jury shows justice when they consider carefully both sides. When we say that someone received a fair trial, we mean that they had the opportunity to present the strongest case for themselves and to be heard on the merits of the case. The blindfold represents the idea that in their assessment, they are not influenced by extraneous factors such as rank, wealth, or family connections. Instead, a just judge must be blind to these things and focus strictly on the relevant facts of the case and render a judgment accordingly. But in fact, this image in the ancient Greek context tells a different story. We noted that Nemesis is the forerunner of Dike as the goddess of justice. The symbolism of the well-known depictions of justice goes back to this earlier deity. We saw that the principle of Nemesis is that she brings down what has grown too great, thus leveling things out in accordance with their proper measure. We see her in some images measuring the precise length of 1 cubit with her gown. Thus, the scale is one of Nemesis's tools for measurement. She can put the actions on the scale to see if they're too exalted and thus tip it out of balance. If this is the case, then she needs to intervene and bring things back into balance by reducing what has grown too large. The blindfold simply indicates that her work is mechanical. It's just about restoring balance, and the details of the individuals and their specific actions are not important. She doesn't have sympathy for specific people, but just acts on a fixed principle. So on this ancient view, justice is not about listening fairly to two sides in a conflict. It's about the restoration of balance. The notion of balance is an absolutely central one to Greek thinking, and it can be found not just in their conception of justice, but in many other areas as well. For example, in Plato's Republic, the famous city-soul analogy draws a comparison between the individual faculties of human beings and the parts of the state. In both cases, the idea is that the individual elements each play specific roles in conjunction with the others. Only together can they create a healthy individual and a healthy state. But the key is that the individual elements must remain in the correct proportions in order for the balance to be maintained. Thus, both the state and the individual are conceived as consisting of a balance of different parts. We've already noted the relativistic element in the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. One aspect of his doctrine is that everything is a part of a larger whole, and that opposites, while they seem absolute, are in fact complementary and could not exist without one another. For example, he is claimed to have said, quote, "The road up and the road down are one and the same." The idea here is that the direction of the road depends on the subject's own perspective. If one is standing in a given position, it makes sense to say that a given road leads to the north, but this is not an absolute claim. From a different perspective, the very same road can be said to be a road to the south. Thus, up and down, right and left, north and south, and other opposites are never absolutes, but only reflections of a certain perspective taken by the subject. In its essence, a given thing is always both, however contradictory that might sound. The universe consists of opposites that balance out one another in order to create a whole. With this theory of opposites, we can also see a notion of harmony or balance that is found in the conception of Nemesis. The notions of balance, symmetry, and proportion are also key to Greek art. This is most immediately obvious in the well-known works of Greek architecture, such as the Parthenon. It's also evident in Greek tragedy, where an attempt is made to portray conflicts as symmetrical relations, such as the conflict between the state and the family, as depicted in Sophocles' Antigone, or that between the duty to revenge a family death and the duty to revere one's parents in Aeschylus' Oresteia. The Greek mathematicians also developed the concept of symmetry in geometry. Our English word symmetry comes from the Greek symmetria, coming from metron, meaning measure, and sun, a prefix meaning together. Thus, symmetry is something that has a common measure, or more generally, the harmonic arrangement of parts that fit together in the right measure. The Pythagorean theorem, which states that the square of the hypotenuse, that is the side opposite the right angle, is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, is based on a clear awareness of the proportions and measures. The Platonic solids, that is the tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the isosahedron, are based on the principle of symmetry and regularity. Greek medicine also made use of the notion of balance, a theory articulated by the physician Hippocrates. He understood health to be the condition of maintaining the correct balance of different elements, the so-called humors. Specifically, the human body is conceived to consist of 4 liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness occurs when this balance is upset and one element becomes more prevalent than it should be. In his work, The Nature of Man, Hippocrates criticizes the pre-Socratic philosophers for their attempt to reduce everything to a single element. For example, as Thales wanted to understand everything as water and Anaximenes as air. These views, he argued, are always one-sided. The correct view is one that understands the workings of the different elements together with the others. From these examples, it's clear that the basic idea behind Herodotus' notion of nemesis was quite widespread in the Greek world. Moreover, although originally the idea was personified and conceived as a goddess, the idea behind it is perfectly sound and can be applied in any number of entirely secular contexts. This movement from the mythological to the secular or even scientific is, as we've seen, a characteristic of the complexity and ambiguity of Herodotus' work. Historians of ideas often talk about the Greek scientific revolution, but revolutions don't happen with one event or, as it were, with a single blow. Rather, they're a part of a longer and more complex movement. Herodotus was a part of this in his attempt to develop history as a field of scholarly study, but he didn't manage to emancipate himself fully from the mythological tradition.